Hi everybody, welcome to week 5. Technically you should be looking at this on Tuesday the 15th, but I'm going to put it up on Sunday the 13th, and I'm hoping you catch it actually a little bit early. I want to start right here in Schoology and show you all this old stuff here, this stuff that says August, week 1, week 2, that sort of thing. In about probably the end of this week, I'm going to put that into its own folder that says August. It's still there if you need it, but I'm going to move it out of the way so that we can focus on September. By the way, if you still have not given me your notebook check, and many of you haven't, this is where it goes, and you need to get it in there soon because a lot of you have a 0 on it. This is last week's instructions, and we are in September 2020, so I'm going to go ahead and click that. And remember, I like to expand it by clicking this little guy right here. When you click that, it makes it go big. And last week we did a couple of things. I want to talk to you about the lab from last week because we have another lab next week, and I want to talk to you about it real fast. You know, we're going to be doing these activities, these lab-like activities, and sometimes it's easy, like the lab from a week or two ago, or 2 or 3 weeks ago, where I asked you to get some flowers and some food coloring. That's the kind of lab that I'm hoping to have you do at home. I've got one next week that involves potatoes. And yeah, you're going to have to do that. So, you know, I think that if I ask you to go get some flowers every once in a while and that sort of things, that's not so bad. Now, last week we had a lab that it said you needed a microscope. And no, I did not expect you to have a microscope. And if you looked at the instructions inside of Schoology here, you'll notice that there's in big yellow it says you cannot do the actual lab because you do not have the microscope. Just read the information, and I even gave you a video to talk about the lab as to what I wanted you to do. Okay, so yes, I wanted you to do the activity, but no, I didn't need you to do the actual lab or to have the microscope. We just don't have those we don't have those funds available yet to be able to get you guys that stuff one day, but not this day. Okay. And there was some stuff I needed you guys to do. There was a tutorial on the basic units of life talking about the cells. I needed you guys to do the guided notes, and then we took a test. And so we're kind of talking about cells right now. This week we're going to move on. I'd like for you to notice that Monday, September 14th is a professional development day. There's no class. So you're going to skip that. And actually, I've given you not much to do this week. Well, let me rephrase that. There's a lot to do this week, and this activity here on the AIDS epidemic, it's a pretty lengthy activity, so I'm giving you 3 days to do it. If you start on Monday, technically you get 4 days to do it. I'm going to put it up on Sunday night, and if you look, you could actually do it starting Sunday night if you're fast enough, but you're already there. Never mind. Anyway, there is something to do on Friday, so we are not just doing this AIDS epidemic activity this week. There's actually a tutorial to do on Friday, but I will probably include a little walkthrough of that for week 6. Right now I just want to focus. It's going to take me 20 minutes just to go through this AIDS epidemic activity. Blah. So we're going to go ahead and click on that, and I'm going to talk to you about it. But notice, once again, this AIDS epidemic activity, you have until Thursday to get it complete. That's the thing I'm about to show you. And then you need to start on the next tutorial, which is on cell processes and transport. But we're going to kind of make that next week. Okay. All right. So let's look at this activity. It is called the AIDS epidemic, and there's only 7 pages, most of which is, you know, not much. You're going to be doing most of the work here. In this activity, you're going to construct and present a scientific argument supporting or opposing the view that AIDS currently meets the definition of a pandemic. Now, I love this right here. Even though it's kind of weird, we are in cells. We're not really talking about viruses. AIDS is a virus. Well, AIDS is caused by a virus called HIV. But this is a good spot to put it for a couple of reasons. One, viruses infect cells, so it's good for us to know how cells work. They infect the cell membrane, which is the next thing we're going to talk about next week. And we're in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm going to be making some comparisons between this and COVID. One of the first things that we're going to do is try to figure out what's the difference between a pandemic and an epidemic and an endemic. Okay. So let's take a look at this picture. This is the inside of a blood vessel in a human, I assume, because HIV only affects humans. There's some things you can see, some structures. Here's the wall of the blood vessel. That's made out of cells, by the way, and we're going to talk about that one day. There's cells passing through it in a fluid called plasma. I see 2 types of cells. You can see a red blood cell. They're kind of disc shape. They always remind me of a certain kind of candy from when I was a kid, but y'all probably never seen it. But they're kind of disc shaped. They're kind of flat in the middle and high on the edges, kind of like a, I don't know, like a I don't know, like a Mentos backwards. I don't know. But these right here, these white globs are white blood cells. They are heavily involved in the immune system, and these are just two. There's probably 200, 300 different types of cells that would flow through the blood in the bloodstream. When you look at blood, you're looking at just helper cells, T cells, B cells, blood cells, two types of blood cells. I mean, there's just so much going on. So they're not giving you a very good representation here, but they only want you to think about the blood cells, the red blood cells, and the white blood cells. Now, these little guys right here that look like a toy, these are the HIV particles. Now, I want to be clear about something. This is not drawn to scale. If this is a red blood cell, then the HIV particle would be so small you probably couldn't see it. The HIV particle is very small, but it is a virus. And I'd like for you to notice that it's shaped kind of like a toy. And if you look at it under a microscope, it would look very similar to coronavirus, even though they're not really related. It's just the shape of the virus. And so this is nothing more than a piece of protein, kind of like a plastic wrap around the inside of it, which is a piece of DNA, or in the case of HIV I think it's RNA. And that's all it is. It does not have all of the things that a cell would have. Cell membrane, cell wall, sometimes plasma on the inside, nucleus, organelles, all that stuff. Virus particles don't have that. They're very small, but the way that they work is they get inside of the cell. See, the plastic, the protein coating on the outside kind of disappears once it injects the DNA or the RNA on the inside, and then that goes in and rewrites, like this whole thing is like a factory, and it rewrites the factory to tell it to, instead of making parts for the cell and working the cell, it says make more viruses, and that's how it reproduces. HIV was first kind of named in 1982. That's almost 40 years ago. I remember that when I was a kid. I remember watching the news. Well, my dad made me watch the news, but that night I remember Tom Brokaw coming on the news and talking about this thing called HIV or AIDS. Actually, they didn't call it HIV because back then we didn't know it was caused by a virus. It was just called AIDS. And there were a group of people living in California that had a disease that caused their immune system to shut down. So let's talk about what AIDS means. It stands for acquired immune, immune deficiency syndrome. Okay, so let's look at each word. Acquired in this case refers to the fact that you contract it, you get it. It's not something you're born with or something that's caused by some kind of defect in your DNA. You acquire it from somewhere else. Basically, it means that it's infectious. The I stands for immuno, which means your immune system, and the D stands for deficiency or deficient. And you put those two together, and it means it causes your immune system to become deficient or suppressed. And then, of course, S means syndrome. So before we even knew that it was a virus, we knew that it was caused, or what the symptoms were, and we call that AIDS. And AIDS spread very rapidly. Yes, it started in a certain community of people, but then it spread very rapidly to everyone. And at one point, the per capita, which means percentage-wise, the highest rates of HIV infection in the United States were in Belglade, Florida, which is just on the other side of Lake Okeechobee. And so there was a huge problem with us not understanding this was an emerging virus. We had no idea. And we had no idea how it was transmitted. We had no idea what was causing it. We didn't know it was a virus. It could have been something in the water for all we knew. But rapidly, the Centers for Disease Control identified what it was within just a few months, really, and started to study it. And that was back in 1982. Now, does that sound familiar? Because we just went through that with a whole other emerging virus called Corona, or COVID-19. And so as a result, we're doing the exact same thing. We're learning about a virus. It's probably going to be here forever, and some form of it, and we're going to have to learn to deal with it. We will get to a point with COVID and where it's just, okay, we'll get a vaccination for COVID just like we get our flu shot every year, and we'll probably live through it. But we still are in that early stage of trying to understand it, trying to identify what causes it, or how it transmits, what it does to the human body. We just don't understand it yet, which is why we're being cautious. We did the same thing with HIV. Now, we've learned now with HIV that there are precautions we have to take. When I was a kid, you could go to the doctor and he would take out a glass syringe with a needle in the end and drop some medicine and give you a shot with it, and then they would take that into the back and wash it out and put it through something called an autoclave, which is like a big pressure cooker, and then they would use it again. Today we would never do that. Today we have plastic syringes and disposable needles. They wear gloves, they sometimes wear masks. I mean, they do all these things to prevent themselves from contracting the HIV. But before 1982, things were very different. Well, as a result of HIV, we've changed the way we do things. We're probably going to have to change the way we do things now as a result of COVID. And this is just normal. This is natural. This isn't the government trying to, control you. This is just the way that we keep public health, okay? This picture is a little bit closer look at the particle. Inside of it is just a little bit of, in this case, RNA. And then a little bit of there's an enzyme there called reverse transcriptase, and it's just in a small little plastic bubble. I keep saying plastic, I mean protein, but I think of it as like plastic even though it's not. But and then these little things on the outside, they help it to stick to the cell, the blood cell, and then this thing wiggles its way inside of the cell, goes in until it changes everything, and kind of invades the cell. AIDS is known as late stage HIV because there are several stages of HIV. The first stage being you don't even know you have it. That's one of the problems with HIV, is you didn't even know you have it. Again, similar to coronavirus. You can have corona for a couple of days or weeks before you start showing symptoms and infect other people. Well, HIV is the same way. You can have HIV for a very long time before you start showing symptoms. And the initial spread of HIV, this was the problem, and to some degree it still is. It's because you don't know if you're HIV positive and you are being unsafe either sexually or with blood tissue or with needles or something, and then you then pass it along to someone else. It's similar to COVID, okay? If you are safe with COVID, if you don't, this is why we wear masks, because we don't know if we have COVID or not. I may very well be sitting here right now with COVID. I don't think so, but I might. And so that's why I wear a mask. I go out in public, I wear a mask. That way I'm not spreading the disease that I may or may not have. And it's the same thing with HIV. You practice safe sex. You're very careful with blood tissues. You don't share needles. You may not have HIV, but you don't want to pass it along. And so this is what we learned about all kinds of diseases that are viral. And HIV kind of taught us a lot. And so now with COVID, we are trying to convince people to behave the same way. Just like COVID, there's no cure for HIV because it's a virus. We can't cure viruses. Now you may be thinking, wait a minute, what's a vaccine? Well, let me be very clear about this. A vaccine is something that we give before you get the virus. Once you have the virus, there's not much we can do. We can let it run its course. That's not entirely true. There are some medications now that can help with viruses, but that's only been in the last 5, 6, 7 years. With HIV, once you get it, once you have it, you've always got it. It never goes away. That's a scary thought. So if we could vaccinate you against these viruses, then you wouldn't contract any of these viruses. I don't have polio, for example. Because I was vaccinated against polio when I was a child, and so I won't ever get polio. Now we don't have a vaccine for HIV right now. There are people that are working on it. Of course, right now we're focusing on COVID, but maybe by learning how to create a vaccine for COVID, we'll figure out how to create a vaccine for HIV. But AIDS is what happens in the later stages of having this HIV infection. After a while, it takes over the cells that make the immune system. I told you it took over cells, but it takes over the cells that makes the immune system and basically destroys the immune system. And as a result, no one dies from HIV or AIDS, okay? They die from the subsequent infection that you get later on. You don't have an immune system. Next time you get a cold, which would normally just be like, oh, I'm going to stay home and eat chicken soup and watch Price is Right. Instead, it kills you. And so we want to avoid contracting HIV for those very reasons. In this activity, we're going to develop a presentation that helps us to support or oppose the idea that AIDS still meets the definition of what we call a pandemic. So we're going to talk about some words here in just a minute. The next slide, and I want you guys to start reading these, okay? Because I'm going to tell you how I'm going to give you a grade. You're going to get 50 points, and you get 10 points each for each part that you're about to do. And you're going to see in just a minute that you'll get, a total of 50 points, depending. So I'm sorry, it's worth 100 points because the last thing is 50. So it's these first parts are worth 10 points each for a total of 50 to here, and then here's worth another 50. So it's worth a total of 100 points, and this is pretty significant, you guys. It's going to go in as a quiz grade, so you need to do everything well. So this is the part where it tells you what to do. You're actually going to be creating a presentation. I would encourage you to use Google Slides. 15 to 20 slides each, and if you go through here and you count, there's 11 things here, then you have to write 4 more things for a total of 15. And I would think, okay, then that means that these are each one slide. If on top of that you want to add a title presentation, a title slide, and then at the end, if you want to add a bibliography page, you have to do a bibliography, and there's just a couple of ways to do it. But one of them is to just add a bibliography page at the end. The other one you can do is at the bottom of each slide, just put the whatever sources used there. So whatever you want to do, but you're going to have probably, I'm thinking, well, you got to have at least 15 slides. That's a rule, but you know, maybe even a few more. Okay, so you're going to be making 2 arguments, and you're going to argue for or against these 2 things. AIDS continues to be a global health crisis, yes or no, and AIDS still meets the definition of a pandemic, yes or no. They should be fully supported by scientific evidence. Now you're starting to see that this says you're going to do it in 2 to 3 hours. I think it's going to take you a little bit longer, but I figure an hour a day, that gives you 3 days to do it, right? I would encourage you to watch or go to this link. It tells you a little bit about the research process if you think you're a little shaky on it. But pretty simply, you're going to be doing things here. You're going to kind of find that answer. You're going to Google it. What is a pandemic? Okay. Now this is an example of what you might want to put these 2 slides to these 2 things on the same slide. What is a pandemic, and how is a pandemic different from an endemic or an epidemic? Okay. I'll give you a little bit of a hint. Pan refers to the globe. Pan means across everything. So a pandemic is an outbreak of a disease that covers the whole world. Epi, right here, means a little bit more close, and it's just like a local problem. Okay, so an epidemic versus a pandemic, and an endemic. I want you guys to look that up yourself. So anyway, I want you guys to tell me what is a pandemic and how is it different from an endemic or an epidemic. Okay, there's a slide or 2. The next thing I want you to do is, what is the life cycle of HIV once it enters the body? How does the genetic code of the virus change? Now, I want to be clear about something. It is okay if you go find this information and to some degree copy it and paste it. It may be very long, so you have to shorten it. Don't give me, 500 words on one slide, because it's not going to be right. But if you go and you Google this and you find a video, you can put that in there. If you find a whole website, you can just copy and paste and maybe add in a picture and shorten it down to where it looks good. Okay, so I'm not expecting you to do all this writing necessarily, but I am expecting it to look good. Okay, how does HIV affect the body? Go find that, turn it into a slide. How do people become infected with HIV? Okay, how does AIDS develop from an HIV infection? That's a good question, because just because you have HIV doesn't necessarily mean you have AIDS. AIDS only appears in the later stages. Okay, and that's what's scary about things like HIV, is that it takes so long before you have symptoms and you realize that you're spreading it to others, similar to COVID. Although with COVID it's a matter of weeks, with HIV it's a matter of years. This is interesting. What are the current rates of infection across the globe? And I want you to find me some examples. Try to find me one on each continent. Tell me about North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa. Tell me which one of these is the worst. I'm going to go ahead and give you a little hint. The worst is Africa by far. It is predicted that in this couple of decades, in the 2000s, until we really do something different in Africa, in some areas of Africa, 25% of the deaths are going to be caused by HIV, and it gets worse. There are some areas in which 35%. There are small villages in which 50% of the deaths are caused by HIV. We are producing more HIV orphans in Africa than any other place in the world, and it's becoming such a huge problem that Africa it's very sad. So I want you to look that up. Tell me in the U.S. and in other places, and then try to figure out what's different. What's different? Why is HIV different in some places than others, or rates of infection? Where is it the worst? We've already talked about that. You might be able to put these 2 together. I don't know. how do we treat it? What's currently available? And if there is treatments, by the way, we don't ever cure HIV, okay? But we do get to a point where we can make it, instead of lethal, we can make it chronic, okay? There's a very famous NBA player from when I was a kid called Magic Johnson, and the guy was great. He was I think he was a center, maybe he was a forward for the Lakers, can't remember, but when you thought about the best basketball players in the world, Magic was right up there, okay? He and Jordan, Jordan said Magic's good. So anyway, long story short, he got AIDS. Now, that was back in the 80s, late 80s. I remember it was a very famous thing, but guess what? He's still around. And so there are ways that we can, he still has HIV, but we can treat it. We can make your life to the point where it doesn't seem like you have any symptoms from HIV. We treat the disease to that degree. It never goes away, and you can still make other people sick, but you you at the very least aren't dying from it. But then yet Africa still has 50% of the people dying from HIV in some places. So why? Why do some regions of the world have better access to treatments than the others? Look that up. Now remember, for all of these, you have to find me a source. You can't just give me your opinion. You have to go find it and add a source to your bibliography about it, okay? And then finally, what is the average life expectancy for someone with HIV, and is that different around the globe, okay? Then here you're supposed to write 4 additional questions for a grand total of these 11 plus 4 more, and these are ones that you come up with. And that's going to be a little tough, but maybe you could come up with a few. I don't really know where they kind of are supposed to come out of your brain. I don't know where you get them, and there are it could be a little hard, but sure, just look around, maybe right in front of you. You'll never know when you can find help for things like that. Part B is to find some credible sources. Now I'm not going to go through this, I want you to read this, but I want to be very clear. I expect you to give me a credible source. I will be checking. Are your sources from places that are, ones that aren't, like Uncle Bob's, blog? CDC.gov is a very credible source. Anything ending in .org, .edu, .gov, these are credible sources. And a lot of .coms are still very good. I mean, FoxNews.com, CNN.com, MSNBC.com, these are good sources as well. Okay, ask yourself these questions about whatever document you find. Specifically here at the end, how old is it? And are there opinions in the document? Because if it gives opinions, there's a chance that you are reading something that, maybe not is scientific. Scientific papers rarely put out opinions. So scientific articles rarely put out opinions. They just kind of explain the facts. Back to how old is the document? Just a general rule with me, if it's more than 5 years old, no, forget it. Okay, so some things to think about. That's part B. I need you to list them all here, and they also have to be inside of the presentation. Now, one thing I want you to understand is you don't have to do this. Man, I am not going to make you learn how to do citations. I hated doing these in college, and you don't have to do it. At least it's not my job to teach you. So in this particular assignment, just give me the website. That's all you got to do. Okay. Yeah, because this right here, this is the biggest nightmare you'll ever face, so just ignore that. Part C is taking some notes. As you go to each of these sources, take down a few notes. Yes, I will be looking, so you have to write down some notes. Here's some examples of, well, you won't have this, but here's some examples of what you might write down when you're going to a website. And you can do that digitally, but I want it copied and pasted here. You should have, I think the insinuation is you should have 15 different websites. There should be at least 15 different things inside of here, okay? And then finally, organize your information by simply making an outline. Make me an outline here. Sorry, I didn't mean to say finally. But make me an outline here of how you're going to write your paper. There's an example, okay? And then finally put it all together. Inside of it, I want to see some pictures and maybe even a YouTube video or something there. And list some of the sources that you may want to use in here. Some examples would be these pictures, and that's it. And then here's part F, which is put it together and deliver your presentation. Now I'm going easy on you. All I want you is to put it together, and actually in this particular thing you're going to leave blank, okay, because I'm going to have you put it into Schoology. But in Schoology there'll be a place for you to give me your presentation. But read this, because I'm a stickler. I'll tell y'all something. I grew up in Bassinger. I grew up riding a horse, driving a tractor, picking oranges. And if I can write well, so can you. So you have no excuses. Make sure that you are using proper grammar, proper spelling, proper punctuation, that you're capitalizing properly. Okay, have somebody else read it. Remember, I'm giving you at least 3 days to do this. Okay, so do not copy this, but this is kind of an idea of what I'm looking for in terms of each slide. All right, okay, fairly long, but as a result, I want you guys to work on this week. I do want you to start this on Friday, but I'm not going to talk about it until next week, and then that'll be that. Remember to send me an email if you need some help. I get a lot of emails from you guys. That's great. You have my text number. If you don't, look it up because it's right in that first week video. You guys can shoot me a text. Of course you can call me. It's easier if you guys email or text me. And I have done some Zooms with some people, and that works well. If you have any questions and you just don't think we can handle it with a text or an email, shoot me a Zoom. Please get caught up. Please get to work. Please do a good job on this activity. You'll notice I'm giving you 3 days, and that means that I expect you to do a good job on it. Okay, so I'm going to end it there. Contact me if you need some help. Thank you very much.